Hello, everybody. It's Frank Norris from the Frank and Stan chat. This is number 31 of these. And as you can see, we have a guest in the bottom of the screen there. But before we introduce our guest, let's just say hello to the other half of the Frank and Stan combo. It's Stan Johnson. Good morning, Stan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to number 31.
I know. I mean, when we started these, we thought, oh, we'll do, as we keep saying, we'll do a couple and then we'll run out of steam. But actually, I think we've been helped by the government this year. I think we've been helped. Quite a lot to get our teeth into.
Yeah, certainly is.
And good morning, Andy.
Morning, gentlemen. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. For those of, for sort of our regular viewers and those that are just joining to see what you've got to say, Andy, can you just tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Okay, so my background was being a teacher, and then I was an executive head. Was one of the first exec heads, I think, probably in the country. So I took that role on in about 2009. So it was before multi-academies and all of those things. So really, I had a blank piece of paper to really work on at that point, which is, I love those kind of things. And then I went and worked alongside a local authority from there with a head teacher association. So I chaired that and kind of got to work quite closely with an executive team within the local authority representing the kind of school sector at that level. More recently, I kind of split my time in numerous ways. So I have a fellowship at the University of Manchester, where I've been doing some research on system leadership and curriculum. I do some work also with UCL, where I do some leadership design programs. Also, an interesting one is I've just started doing some work with Liverpool Hope on their kind of Centre for Education Policy Analysis. So it's really kind of a research side in that part of my life. And then I also do lead for an organisation called Outstanding Leaders Partnership. So they're one of the largest NPQ providers in the country. So I lead their partnership network and support our partners across the country, delivering NPQs, and I do the design and delivery work on the EL program for that as well. So I kind of keep myself fairly busy. And I also chair, one of the things that kind of keeps me grounded is I chair a trust in Greater Manchester, a primary school trust, and we have 9 primary schools in that trust. So it's been a fascinating 9 months. Most of my time is actually spent in that bit of work, to be honest. It's the bit that I don't get paid for, to be fair, but it's been a real, for schools, the last 9 months have been kind of a roller coaster. And I think just that to me has been the bit that has been kind of at the forefront of my mind and kind of attention, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate also. I mean, it's great to have that sort of what's happening now feel. And Stan and I are close enough to schools to feel as though we can experience sort of the white heat of all of this. So I think it's been really useful still being connected in some shape or form with schools to actually contribute to these Frank and Stan chats with some meaning and some purpose and some relevance and some authenticity.
It's been really interesting actually this week. So all of this week and at the end of last week, we've been delivering on our NPQEL. Started off last Friday working on our international cohort. So we had people from Hong Kong, Argentina, Mongolia, Qatar, and then we've come into the UK, and we've kind of started off with our Manchester cohort, who are all in total lockdown and total kind of chaos going on in their schools. Then we go to Birmingham, and it's slightly better, and they kind of, some of the schools hadn't had bubbles burst, which was, I think a novelty from where we are, because I'm obviously up in Manchester with you guys. And then down south, and we had someone from Cornwall who was celebrating.
well, let's just get on to what's caught your eye, because actually I'm going to bring up the issue of tears around the country. Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I did some work as a Zoom CPD with some schools, and what caught my eye was some absolutely exhausted head teachers. Not tired, not end of term tired, but absolutely gone now, running purely on routine and adrenaline, not knowing, and everyone said the same thing every day. You've no idea what's going on. And I before I've said, you know, they're under stress, but this looked like almost the end game now. They were exhausted.
I mean, one of the things I was going to raise, we'll probably bring Andy into this as well, is, you know, can anybody really explain to me why it isn't a good idea to close the schools down, even if it's just a few days early, just to ensure that we don't end up with young people and staff all having to self-isolate over Christmas?
Because the politicians have said so, Frank. bow down to their greater understanding. And I have no idea. If somebody could honestly tell me that there's a great amount of learning in that last week before Christmas in schools that can't be missed, I'd love to see it laid out for us.
I mean, it's a bit of maths, really, isn't it? Because we missed so much school. And, you know, what really pivots my mind on this is my younger two children, one's doing their GCSEs this year and one's doing their A-levels this year. And so they've missed so much time from the curriculum. And yet the government have said, you know, well, what we'll do is we'll give people 3 more weeks. So, you know, it doesn't equate to the amount of time they've missed, first of all. 3 weeks does not catch up in any way, shape or form what they've missed in terms of preparation for those significant exams. But 4 days isn't going to make a blind bit of difference either. So it just seems...
It's also those 4 days. I mean, I don't know anybody, you know, really anybody who's advising the Secretary of State is, if they're telling me that those last 4 days of the academic of this year, this term, are full of study. You know, I mean, often this will be the last time in a secondary school a teacher will see that group before Christmas. You know, there's probably just, thanks for sticking with it. You know, if you've got some time over the holiday, don't forget to do this. Really, it's not a, you know, this is stuff you could do virtually anyway.
Mm.
Yeah, I just cannot understand it. Anyway, Andy, what's caught your eye?
Well, I've been reflecting on this word trust, and it does actually come back to that point around the time about why you can't, because there was that trust in our neck of the woods that was hoping to kind of close a bit early. And I've been thinking about the way that word trust is kind of used and thrown about and deployed. And obviously kind of one of the things that the academization agenda was supposed to do was to give the sector some more control over, which is kind of putting trust into the hands of school leaders. And yet that almost seems to have been taken away. And throughout all of this, there's felt a little bit, you know, with the work that I've done with schools, that, you know, there's been a return to a sense of reliance, and that the department doesn't trust the system. And yet at the same time, you've got kind of the situation at the back end of last week where the Prime Minister was prepared to put his trust into somebody that was kind of really causing chaos. And, you know, I don't know the ins and outs of that scenario, but it was more the perspective of where one's trust is put and how it is put there, and where trust is given and where trust is taken away. And I think there's been a really interesting kind of dance around that kind of notion of trust and it's been really highlighted to me over the last week, particularly as we've thought about those things.
I'm a fan really of lockdown, to be honest. But actually, I think that it looks as though a number of Tory MPs are going to question whether or not the government trusts the people to do the right thing. You know, it looks as though a number of, particularly in the north, where there are some Tory MPs, that they're actually up in arms over this and really want to see, you know, a greater level of trust given to individuals to make the right decisions. And actually, I think I know the CEO of the trust that decided to, you know, that they were going to close down, and a more honourable and committed individual you will not meet. You know, this is not somebody who is just trying to make life easy for them. That was a genuine decision they made. I suspect they did it in the best of interests for their staff and for their kids. But actually, the way this has been managed, it just goes back, doesn't it, to that point I think I made a few weeks ago, that Lord Jim O'Neill, who chairs up the Northern Powers Partnership, who knows government very well, said the DfE is the most controlling of departments.
What's interesting, Frank, that is, I know Stockport were considering an early finish. I'm not sure that power that the government have over multi-academy trusts exists over local authorities to make that decision.
Well, so I live in Stockport.
Sure.
My kids work for Stockport, and they are finishing 2 days early. And yesterday there were approaches from the DfE on the council.
But I don't think they've got. I don't think they've got the same power.
No,
so,
they're not. They're not reversing it. The council have said that they're not reversing that decision.
What's interesting there, though, is the autonomy that would have gone or should have gone to multi-academy trusts, which is clearly not gone in this circumstance. That the local authority actually have more autonomy to make those decisions than multi-academy trusts have.
And the thing about that is as well, they're more in tune to the local need. So actually, those decisions, there's a great piece that we use on our NPQEL program called which is by a guy called David Marquette, who was a captain of a US submarine, and his book's called Turn the Ship Around, and he says move the agency to where the people know the most information. And it seems to me what we're doing is we're moving the agency about as far away from where the people have the local knowledge as we possibly can. And I think that's an interesting thing that happens.
My guitar teacher, never thought I'd get onto this, but my guitar teacher was trained at Sandhurst, and he tells me regularly about you need to give operational people in battle freedom to make decisions. Because you have an objective that you need to to take that hill, or you need to sort of progress there. But actually, you cannot make those decisions after the battle has started, from far away. And actually, this feels to me exactly the same thing about. And there's dogma and politics in this, isn't it? It's the way that I'm moving into tears now, but the way that the government has gone for Andy Burnham. And really, I mean, it must be galling for, in Liverpool, where I do work, there's not a lot of love in the hearts of many Liverpool people, for a Tory government, but actually to hear ministers lauding, the city, that must really be difficult to take. But actually there is a lot of sort of politics behind some of the decision making. So we talked before about last year in the exams about algorithms, but there must be an algorithm being used for tiers as to what you'd hope there was, but actually I would like to see that algorithm and to see sorry I know. Anyway.
I love your naive approach to what's going on in the world.
Anyway, let me move on to what's caught my eye this week. I mean, we're 15 minutes in it and we haven't even gotten to it. My daughter lives quite close to us, and there is a national charity that has been raffling a house opposite her, and it's a really nice house. It costs probably about $1.5 million, and the guy who they announced the winner yesterday, so my daughter can now see who her new neighbour is, and actually it's a guy who lives in Lincolnshire, I think, and his wife. He bought tickets for this raffle because his wife died of cancer, and they went to his house and with his film crew. And if ever it was a good news story for this guy, the joy and the sort of feeling of goodness that there was in this sort of dark times, that he's in this sort of very small terraced house. He's had this sort of bad luck, with his wife, and he has had a very sort of troubled life. But actually, he's got this fantastic, and he is going to move in. So, it's just a really good upbeat story. And I want to say that there's the reason why my daughter lives on this posh street in Cheadle is there's a lot of a really bad story about that, where people die early and what have you. And that's the reason why her and her husband can live in that house. But actually, you know, it's a really good news story. So I just really wanted to share that. So I will be tweeting about that later today. Anyway, can we get on to something then around, we had a bit of a discussion, Andy, about bullying.
I'm sure you probably have.
Yeah. You had a few things to say about that on Twitter, didn't you?
Well, again, and it's one of the things that, ironic, we've been touching on in our NPQ delivery this week, because we talk about ethical leadership. And it comes back to what I was saying about trust, because I think we ask the kind of participants on our programs to think about what is the role of the executive leader in driving an ethical and moral framework. And obviously, in schools over the last 18 months, the ASCL, and now it's moved to the Chartered College, have had this kind of ethical framework focus. And now the new standards, head teacher standards, have come out in the last couple of weeks. And ethical leadership is at the heart of that. And I mean, it was ironic, wasn't it, really, that it was anti-bullying week, to be fair, that we see this thing. And if
it's a skill, this government have a skill for the ironic.
But one of the things that I've been reflecting on over this period of time now is, and it was something that came up in one of our discussions with one of the groups that we were working with, was what does it say about the state of leadership where, and okay, I know the Nolan principles have been around for a while, but we have to build into a head teacher framework the reminder that we have to be ethically orientated in our agency and activity. And I just think the messages that this government is sending with some of the things it's doing, I don't know the ins and outs of the scenario, right? I've not read the reports, but even, you know, the PR around it cannot be good for them. In itself, that cannot be good. And what message does it send if there had been, and it seems to be, you know, the guy that wrote the report has resigned. You know, he's made a decision. I mean, I think the comment was, I think I tweeted to Frank, was, I'm actually speechless about it, more than having things to say about it at the moment. Trying to find the right thing to say, because you want to be positive, and you're dealing with, and people do make silly decisions when they're under pressure. You know, stress does make you stupid, and it does make you do silly things. And so, but yeah, I don't know whether that's answered the question about what I think about it at the moment, but I think it isn't good. That's one of the things I think. It's not a good, we are not in a good place at the moment.
It goes back to things like, what are the facts? The facts are that the report, and I've not read it, but the highlights I've seen said that it broken the ministerial code. That's the fact. But then the Prime Minister says, well, I don't believe that's happened really. And it's Trumpism, isn't it? It's the deny something that's there in black and white, and deny it enough and everyone will forget it. Plus, I don't know if you've looked on Twitter at the responses to that, and the responses to that are really quite worrying. You know, I'm all for the civil service getting a good kick in, and I think when you're in charge, you should kick and bully people to get them into. Wow, what's in the mindset that thinks that's the way you lead?
Yeah, it's. I mean, there is a point, isn't there, where you feel as though if we were making that decision in school as a head teacher, I think I probably, if I'd made that decision, I would have lost the staff room completely.
Yeah,
I think.
And what worries me now is the number of people, MPs. You know, I'm sad to say there were Tory MPs. You know, not that I'm not saying I'm sad to be Tory, but it's the fact that there was that allegiance to the party, who then tweeted how well they knew the Home Secretary, and completely undermining the process. I mean, I always want to take it back to school. I would have definitely lost the staff room. So I think I probably would have been on my way out, because I think there would have been so much pressure on the governing body and everybody to get rid of me or to overturn the decision. But actually, I think I probably would have lost quite a lot of the student population if I was in secondary school as well, if this had come out in public. But here we have a government that actually, Prime Minister can just do what he likes. He's completely immune.
we work and live in a kind of socio-economic position now where actually we forget the dignity of humans.
Oh.
And I think we can fall into the trap in schools. And you know, there are some things that I hear people say in schools, and I just think you wouldn't say that if you could just take yourself out.
Yes.
Of the scenario and look at it from the outside in, you wouldn't, surely you would realize that we don't speak to people like that, because it's just not how we're supposed to be with one another. And that this scenario shows to me that, you know, there was people in the department that by all accounts were being they were almost being treated like a cog in a machine rather than a person first and foremost. And I always used to say, I did some teacher training a while ago. I was involved in some professional studies, and I would always say one of the things that is really important, if, you know, this is your success as a teacher, is never forget, more than anything, the most important thing is that person's name. That child in your class has a name, and under that name sits a whole load of, you know, a life. And that is, don't remember that before anything else about what progress, flight trajectory they're on, or anything like that. That they have a life, and you're being given kind of a big responsibility to look after it.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that we're in a world where actually quite often we forget that dignity at the moment.
Well, isn't this, again, going back to your earlier point about your captain of the submarine, isn't this about anchoring yourself to what's actually going on? I mean, when we chatted to Andy Hargreaves, one of the things we spoke about there was engaging with the people that are closest to the problem. You know, if you want to make that as a school, if you've got a building problem, you need to talk it through with your building supervisor, your caretakers, your cleaners. It's no point in thinking as the head, I know everything. And it's having that conversation with people at different levels who are closer to the issue that makes you a better leader, in my view. Because you trust, back on trust, you trust their decision because they know more about it than you. Always used to make me feel funny at school that when I first became a head, I wasn't really trusted to lock the school up at night, right? Because that wasn't my job. But the caretaker did it every day. And I got most affronted by this. And then when I sort of rationalised it, the caretaker has a complete routine to go through to lock the school up that's practiced and done and knows the stuff. I was just going out through the front door and locking the door and assuming everything else. So there was an element that was correct, that I wasn't of the right level to be the last person locking the school up. But it's an arrogance to say I can do everything because I'm in charge, but also a lack of understanding that there are posts and jobs and routines that don't require great academic thought, but for the academics, it's an easy one to miss.
If we think about all these decisions, you know, over the weeks and very much today, there does seem to be a sort of a mentality about not apologizing and not accepting that, you know, errors are made, and we should bring those to the fore so we can actually be clear that I'm aware of a potential error. I did it this way. In hindsight, I perhaps might have done it slightly differently.
Wouldn't that have been, Frank, a great way out for Boris Johnson? Instead of saying, no, it didn't happen, blah, 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 to say, yes, I understand that, but in the current crisis, you know, people are under stress. I have asked her to make a formal apology. And if she makes the formal apology, then we'll crack on as if it, you know, got a line under it. But it wasn't. It was one of my favourite apologies, wasn't it?
Your favourite apology is the non-apology.
Yeah, I apologise if you're hurt by what I've said, but I've not apologised for what I've said.
Yeah, I do remember Miriam Rosen, Stan, who we were mentored by when we were doing that year, saying to me that it doesn't matter, you know, bullying is bullying. If the person feels bullied, they're bullied, you know, and that was the point that was being made. And I think that there was that has stood me well, I think, in the way that I've tried to deal with people, you know, certainly since then. But that actually seems to have been lost in all of this. That I think the point somebody was making before about the press picking up on well, you know, it's okay. The rough and tumble of government life means that, you know, senior members of the cabinet should be allowed to swear openly to junior members of the civil service. You know, it's really dangerous territory to get into that, where that becomes acceptable.
The bit that kind of was swirling around the back of my head was also, there's something that I think there's a great kind of notion, which is grace. And we you know, and I'm thinking, and I would always try and find a way of bringing grace or restorative justice into a situation. But on this one, I was really trying to work out where it would fit, to be fair.
Word grace.
Well, that's coming up again, Frank, isn't it? Because it's like our kind word, because Andy Hargreaves talked about the President of the United States taking the changeover with grace and graciously.
Yeah,
and clearly not this time, but in past times.
But that's the key, isn't it? Because the current one seems to be bestowing grace on people that have actually done wrong.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
I mean, we've always tried to centre these discussions on education, but in a way, I think a lot of this may well unravel and affect a number of, you know, British politicians in due course. So I don't, you know, I think that could be, you know, it could have quite a significant impact, you know, in the future if all this does unravel, because I think the interconnectedness, you know, is really important. I suppose just getting back to education, it's who you want to mix with, isn't it? Who you want to be associated with, who you want to be influenced by. And actually, I think there is this issue here around making sure that the people that you are talking to there's a level of respectability, there's an honesty, a way of doing things that's not underhand. And I know Stan criticizing me for my naivety, but I suppose I will hang on to that, because actually I still feel as though those are the sorts of things that we should be looking up to people who are running these things.
And what's interesting, that again, just chatting with the kind of executive leaders around the country in this last week, that realization that they hold a unique place within their communities, and to maintain integrity, that is, you know, I think that's, for me, it's the issue is that maintaining one's integrity, because you have a very visual role in the community. And I think school leaders are beginning to realize that's more than just, and I know some people, you know, that can take a little bit of umbrage by the perception that we're keeping schools open because we're babysitting certain ages of children, but actually we are an integral part of a complex social network, and we're at the heart of that. And actually head teachers particularly, their integrity matters because it is very visual in the community.
I agree. Okay, well, it's amazing how quickly 28 minutes runs, isn't it? I think we've said that before, haven't we, Stan and Andy, on these? But anyway, thank you very much, Andy, for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no, and it's always interesting talking to you. So, you know, I hope you haven't been put off enough to not come back as another guest. We've had a few.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll be posting this shortly, and also just to remind people that we do put it out as a podcast, just this recording, and so I tweet that link as well. So if you want to follow us on a podcast, you can do. You don't have to watch it on YouTube. But anyway, have a good week, Stan. Have a good week, Andy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.